Um, we are pleased to welcome you tonight to the Alternatives to Violence Project AVP National Gathering 2018. And I want to especially welcome those members of the community who have joined us, facilitators of AVP from across the country and some various far-flung parts of the world. We are privileged this evening to have as our keynote speaker, Sammy Rangel. He is the author of Forebears, The Myths of Forgiveness, which is a breathtaking autobiography chronicling the ongoing abuse he experienced and endured as a child that led him down the path that ended in, well, not ended, but included 15 and a half years in, as an incarcerated individual, and many of those years in solitary confinement. Fortunately, that wasn't the end of the story. And in his book, he talks about the in-depth journey that he took to face the difficult topics and the many stages of forgiveness, change, and reconciliation, and recovery from substance abuse. In 2011, Sammy was invited as a representative and panelist at the Summit Against Violent Extremism, which is SAVE, in Dublin, Ireland. In August, just a few months later, as a result of that event, Sammy co-founded Life After Hate, which is a unique 501c3 organization founded and run by former violent extremists. Life After Hate's core services stem from the foundation of its members, reformed ideologies, and decades of rare experiential immersion within some of the world's most violent extremist organizations. So back in August, when we were beginning to think about our programming for this conference, that was about the same time that the violence occurred in Charlottesville, Virginia, with the white supremacist rally and Heather, and I can't remember her name, who was killed. And it got us to thinking even more about our theme, which we had already chosen, which is leaning into difference. And so much of our lives are formed by all the difference in our communities. And we tend to try to congregate in places of safety. And I know personally, I was thinking, you know, my response to this kind of violence is I have to step up. I have to step up and be willing to be uncomfortable and live into going to meet my neighbor, making sure, regardless of who my neighbor is and whether my neighbor believes the same thing I do or not, either politically or religiously or even looks like me, I need to be welcoming and opening and helping to build my community based on honesty, respect, and caring. Because only when we tear down the walls that we are building around us to keep us safe, only when we're willing to lean into the uncomfortable place of the differences and treat people instead of others, treat them as fellow human beings, that's the only way our world is going to change. In AVP, we do a lot of that in our workshops. And it was really exciting to hear at that time about the organization Life After Hate and the work that Sammy does. And I found that there were many parallels between some of the things that we do and some of the things that he does. And so it is our very great pleasure to welcome Sammy, and he's going to tell you more.
We could have missed it, but you know, service work is central to the work that we all do. If you're in the work of helping people, first and foremost is what you give of yourself to that work. And I think me and Julie over the years, it's over the year, it's felt like a year. I think you said it was about 9 months, but over that time period, we started to get the sense that Miriam and your entire group are driven by service. And come to find out, you're all volunteers, and you're constantly giving away what you know to people who are often overlooked, people who need it the most but get it the least often. And so just a very small appreciation from me, from Julie, our organization, and all the people that we represent. I want to give you a copy of my book personally and say thank you. And I will say, this is one of the only presentations and events I have not canceled. As you can see, I'm hobbling up here because I had an accident when I was in Orange County, California, and I broke my leg. And while it only was an hour flight, it was terrible. I can tell you that. You don't fit anywhere when you can't bend your knee, right? Like, try that for a day. That is horrible, man. First of all, thank you to AVP, to the college here, to all the volunteers, to all the staff, the sound guys. Let me tell you what these sound guys did. They actually ran this wire for me all the way down from their office up there, just so I could have my computer here. Just another example of the kind of giving that we give and going overboard. And thank you. And I do want to say that while I am the executive director and one of the co-founders of Life After Hate, there are several of us. It's an example of what anyone can do when they decide to get involved. I think AVP kind of embodies that. When people decide they want to do something, they find ways to get involved. And sometimes they have to create ways to get involved. I'm going to give a little bit of background about some of the context of the work I'm doing, who I am, my evolution. I am the author of this book, and I think it's extremely important for us all to tell the stories that we all have to tell. And while some of us do tell our stories, and I think we all tell our stories in one way or another, we're not always mindful about how we tell those stories. For example, how many of you have ever woken up and said, "This is going to be a crappy day"? We're guilty of that, right? Now, and then there's been those other days where we said, "This is going to be a great day," right? And is it the way that we said the day would be, or is it the way the day naturally was, and we just predicted it correctly, right? In so many ways, by telling my story, it was actually me learning how to talk about my story so that all my suffering and all my experience actually meant something more than just suffering. It was something that I could use to build a life out of, and it was something that I could help others build a life out of. And so it became important not just to tell the story, but to tell the story in a way that could be helpful to others. And so while I did tell my life story, and those types of stories are a dime a dozen, I also put a lot of effort into detailing what the change process was and what it looked like for me when I got out, so that those of us who want to help others change and those of us who are looking to change could have some point of reference of what that might look like from relevant days and times. I also was privileged to do a TED Talk in Hungary, in Budapest in 2015. And I would encourage the professionals and individuals in this room to take a look at that. It's not for self-promotion. I'll tell you right now, we're approaching maybe 500,000 views, if I'm not mistaken, and it's been all over the country. And here in the US, I'm constantly getting messages from clients, social workers, and therapists who are using this in their groups. And the one common theme that's coming back in all those messages, and you can read them yourself through the comments, is that I used to think that there were things I couldn't forgive, but after watching this, I realized that there are ways to do that. And I think will be some interest that we'll talk about in a little bit here about a program that I started in 2012 called Formers Anonymous. How many of you are familiar with the 12-step world, the 12-step programs? And so while the 12-step programs have been around for 80 years or so, I'm also a social worker. And if any social workers in the room are in the room, you'll know exactly what I'm about to say, which is it doesn't matter how good a system is working, a social worker thinks he can always make it better. That's just the way we're wired, it's the way we're designed. And I swear I don't look at anything that I don't think I can make better. And so what I've done is, as my experience as a mental health therapist working in a licensed facility for a number of years, I realized that there were some barriers for the men and women that are constantly being referred and encouraged to go to the 12-step programs. And after listening to their barriers and realizing that some of those barriers I myself experienced in my process of development and change, I decided to do something about it. And so I said, you know what, there's a gap in services here. Let's create a program for men and women addicted to street life, to violence, who live with the long-term effects of incarceration, of segregation, and then who also have to live with the traumatic experience of coming home. That's a culture shock. And as many people that want to hold our coats, our families, our POs, whoever it is, many people just don't know how to guide us efficiently and effectively out of that system and into a world where if you've been gone long enough like I was, it doesn't look anything like it did when I left. And right now we're operating in several prisons near my hometown. It's very friendly for the female population as well, and we've made some substantial changes to that. One of those is, and try to have an open mind here, to men and women who are changing from criminality, having a religious relationship can be difficult at best, especially in the beginning of your process, right? You're still trying to figure out a lot of things about the world, and religion is one of those things, having a religious relationship in some way. And I know that in many of the men and women that I've treated over the years, they had a conflict with having to go to a program that they felt was heavily religious in nature and religious early on. So at the very beginning, you're starting to be hit by these religious terms that if you don't agree with or don't relate to, you feel like you are now on the outside of this group. And you're often asked to just kind of ignore the terms and just kind of, take out of it what you can get. And that can be a barrier for some people, especially someone in the very beginning of a change process. That barrier may be enough for them not to come back or not to feel welcome. And of course, not to mention that some people, will actually shove this stuff down your throat. They'll push it on you, and as if that's the way to do it. And so I removed the religious context out of the literature. And what we talk about are spiritual relationships with people, places, or things that make it worth your while to want to change. And so for that leaves the door open for men and women who can relate to God or any other form of religion, and it leaves the door open for atheists and Buddhists and Muslims and you name it. I don't think we've had any Quakers, but there's still hope. And it allows us to participate as individuals and still feel like we're a part of the group, if that makes any sense to you. We've also done something that I think is even more significant, and it comes out of the best practices in the mental health field. Whenever you tell someone that they're defective, you are actually working against yourself and creating more of the problem. Research shows this. It's just not Sammy up here saying this. When you talk about problems and then you identify people as being a problem, such as being resistant, right? Being defective. Let's talk about step 4, where you have to list all your defects. Some of us are really good at seeing our defects, and sometimes that's all we can see. And so having more of that piled on top of an already suffering image of oneself can be debilitating. And so rather than talking about what's wrong with me, I'd rather talk about what's not working for me. I'd rather talk about where the discord in my life is coming from and how I can reestablish balance in my life. How I can establish meaningful connections to help restore the best parts of my humanity so that I can engage with you. We do talk about those things that are out of balance, but we've changed the way we talk about it so that the person doesn't have to be broken from the beginning and 30 years from now. One of the other main problems that we've solved through Formers for our people is that when you have to say that you're an addict, I think that's one thing. But when you have to say that you're an addict or an alcoholic for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, no matter how much you've changed, as if that's the only starting point that matters, well, then people get a little tired and wary of that. At what point do you get to embrace your new identity, your new self-image, your new works, your new efforts? We have nothing to hide, so transparency is one of our core principles. And we can talk to you about the crimes we've committed, the trail of victims that we left behind, and the efforts that we have towards reconciling some of that. But for me to have to identify myself as a disease doesn't fit for me or the model. And while I can be a person who is living with a disease such as addiction, I was not born a disease and I will not die a disease. And many of our formers agree with that. And at some point, you do need to focus on your change rather than your problems. That's what we've done through FA. I think that works have to be self-evident. And many of the times, and I think, Miriam, you're a great example of this, you're so busy doing the work that you yourself will never acknowledge the work that you do, because you'll just do it. And it took a while, but eventually people started taking notice of the work that I was doing. And I don't take credit for my success. I lay all of the success back at the feet of the people that helped me, that accepted me, that embraced me, that mentored me through this process of change and recovery. And that is still happening today. Mary mentioned the Charlottesville incident that occurred where Heather Heyer was murdered by a violent white supremacist group, a member of that group. And in that time period, in 2016, let me start over. In 2016, the Obama administration awarded Life After Hate $500,000 to combat violent extremism, which is another way of saying white supremacy, fighting white supremacy and violent far-right groups here in the U.S. As soon as the new administration took office, that money was put on hold, and then in June we received notice that that money was being taken back. We went from being number one on the application list of 33 applicants to not even qualifying for funding anymore under the new review. And then Charlottesville happened. 2 weeks after that announcement came to us that we lost the funding, the United Nations asked me to accept an award on behalf of Life After Hate for the work that we're doing here in the U.S. to combat far-right violent extremism. And Forrest Whitaker introduced me, and he called me and our other co-founders heroes for the work that we did. And if there are formers in the room, and by formers I hope you understand what I mean now by that, men and women who have spent any time in the system. I said on behalf of formers, and I want you to know I was talking to presidents, kings, prime ministers, you name it. The audience was full in the General Assembly. So on behalf of formers, we want to say that we do not consider ourselves heroes, but we do consider ourselves, as formers, a part of the solution. And that this honor that they were bestowing upon our organization was proof that redemption is possible for formers. As we get into this, I do want to have a caution for you. Some of the details that we're going to talk about tonight are going to be pretty graphic and maybe hard to hear. But obviously, that's not where the story ended. When I talk about how we tell our stories, we all tell them. If you've ever had a breakup and you went to the one person that you knew was going to co-sign everything that you were about to say, you knew you were slanting that story completely. Fellas, don't just look at the women. It's us too. It's us too, right? But I think the girls do it more. I'm just saying. I'm just playing. I don't want to lose you right now. But the way we tell our story matters. How many of you have ever heard this statement, everything happens for a reason? Who or what determines that reason? Right? And a lot of times when we say that as if there's third-party entity is writing the reason for these things to happen and you're just playing it out. For example, if I step on a rake and it hits me in the face, is that good or bad? It just is. It's an experience. What happens after that depends on us. If we leave that experience and we feel like it was the worst experience ever, then that's what it will represent. But we also have the ability and the choice to leave that experience in some way, shape, or form grateful for the lesson just learned. Correct? And so when we start thinking about what we're going to be talking about tonight, start asking it in these terms. Who is telling our story? Who's writing it? And does the way we tell it matter? Does the way you share it matter? Does the way you share it influence the outcomes? And think of this as a professional. Professionals, right? Raise your hand if you're a professional in the room and you make decisions about people. Raise your hand. Don't be shy. And if you're a parent, you're just as guilty. Wait till your father gets home, right? And then you slant the story, poor kid never had a chance. Right? Now, having said that, does the way we tell our story bring us closer together or pull us further apart? And are you aware of these answers on a regular basis? We often talk about pictures, and we know that pictures are symbols. And my uncle, who is the primary source that I have to give credit to for who I've become today, he said to me that we need symbols because human beings are forgetful by nature. And so this is why we take pictures. This is why we put on objects to remind us of things that are special to us. A picture can tell us about an entire summer, an entire winter, an entire era. A ring can talk about 40 or 50 years of commitment from one person to another. And so when we think about these things, we do create these symbols to tell stories. And sometimes we have these images that create an entire story about something or someone or an event. But we also know that timely deeds are worth even more. I've been out of prison going on 19 years this year, and I will tell you that I have never went without food. And in that 19 years, I can't tell you how I thought I was about to go without food just to have something show up just in the nick of time to save me from hunger. Typically in the form of a generous person. Right? And so that moment meant so much to me, much more than just somebody sharing a lunch with me on a day I didn't have something to eat. Right? It was the timing of that event that made all the difference to me. But then after talking with Miriam today, I know we embody this spirit, because when you have the right skill sets in the right heart, people get the sense that they're being taken care of very well. And this is the difference between going to a doctor's visit who you felt really comfortable with versus one that you just felt violated everything personal about you. And yet they did the same thing, right? And it was about those skill sets. And they're rooted in a certain type of spirit with those skill sets that make things just seem like it was worth going through. And how do you know that you've embodied this spirit? It's when the people that you're serving leave your interaction feeling like that was better than they ever thought it would be. That's when you know you've done something right, from the right place and the right spirit. And so a lot of the times what we're trying to do is connect these dots. And so it sounds very simple that, hey, if you do these things, we talk about compassion, we talk about empathy, we talk about forgiveness, and it all sounds so simple, but we know that in fact it's actually quite complex. And so we need to be somewhat patient through this process, not only patient with others, but patient with ourselves. And I want to let you know that as a professional, what the research is showing and what I've learned through my experience that mirrors the research is that the outcomes of the programs that we're getting are typically by design. I want that to sink in. The outcomes of the programs and the systems that we have are typically by design. Does anybody know the recidivism rate of Indiana? I can tell you what it is in Wisconsin. Year 1, it's about 35%. Year 3, it's about 70%. Pair that with the design. However, what typically happens, and this is where the professionals need to key on what I'm saying. What typically happens is the client blaming, the projection of fault onto the client. Because we can justify the recidivism rate with the evidence of the failure by the client. I ran a reentry program for 3 years. Really 4, but 1.5 of that was planning, and then the implementation started. And we started with those recidivism rates with high-risk offenders. High-risk offenders are at that higher recidivism rate than the 35%, and typically higher than the 70% by year 3. And when we, in the planning stage, the research phase, when we scrub the systems that have contact with reentrants, guess who the #1 driver was behind recidivism in their practice? Call it out. Corrections. Not just parole, but the system of corrections. So the federal government paid attention to that, and they assisted us in asking the state to listen to us in saying that the practice and the design of reentry is broken and is the #1 determining factor on risk for returning back to prison. That was over measuring client behavior. And there's a lot into that, and so I know some of you might be a little perplexed by that and may have issue with that. But for example, let me give you one example. When you supervise someone at the wrong level, low, medium, and high risk, if you have a high-risk offender on low-risk supervision, spells trouble. If you have a low-risk offender on high-risk supervision, it spells failure. And so and what we learned about the system in corrections is that the assessment for risk level was 100% subjective. What does that mean? That there was no determining factor, no measuring stick, no standardization of process, and it was 100% given over to the individual agent to determine that person's risk assessment. If I were to ask you between a drug dealer and a murderer, who is most likely to go back to prison?
Drug dealer.
And yet if you've been paying attention to the news, we're talking about sending low-level drug dealers to prison is bad news, which is true. It doesn't work. However, at the level that we're supervising them is at low, when they should be at a high-risk supervision. Murderers are the least likely of all the different type of offenses to recommit an offense. Right? But the subjectivity of that was powerful, and it was really tilting the scale in the wrong way. And so we had to find a way. We can't go to corrections and say, you're wrong. The same way I wouldn't encourage you to go to a client and say, you're wrong, or a volunteer, you're wrong, right? You can't do that. You have to find ways. So here's what I've done. I have become bilingual in many languages. I now speak Republican, I now speak Democrat, I now speak corrections, I speak all kinds of addictions, law enforcement, federal agencies, state agencies, local. You've got to learn to speak those languages so that when you're speaking to them, you are at least on the same page and using the words in the same way. Because Confucius said, every word has 5,000 meanings. And I'm telling you that rather than judging behavior, we need to try to understand behavior. And I know that's so hard, especially when there are victims. And we're not talking about understanding behavior from some sort of naive position of thinking that, that everyone is safe and can be changed. That's not where we're coming from. When you can understand the type of behavior that leads to harm, self-harm, and otherwise, then you can start to do something about it from a place of understanding. But when you judge a behavior, there is no further action to be taken other than condemnation. We're going to use my life story as a part of the case study. We're going to talk about some of the failures and successes in systems as a result. In this article, is dated January 5th, 1969. My mom was 5 months pregnant with me on the day that this article was written. This article says that the little boy in this picture was beaten with a Tonka truck. His skull was fractured. His body was a mass of bruises. He was in and out of consciousness and was bleeding from various places and wounds on his body. I did not know that until about 5 years ago. The children in this are all my relatives. And all the children in this photo are being physically and sexually abused and living in some of the worst environments that I can imagine. By the time I was about 5 or 6 years old, I was already starting to make a name for myself as having behavioral problems. I was already being put into speech class, which is kind of like the gateway for behavioral and emotional disabilities, when they notice that you can't speak right. My report cards at this point were already starting to read that I was disruptive, I needed to go to the bathroom too much, I answered questions without raising my hand, I raised my hand too much, I couldn't sit still, I couldn't focus. These were the things that were happening on my report card. During that time is an event that occurred that I can laugh about today. It has some value to me today, but during that time it was pretty brutal. This is the apartment that we lived in, and across from that apartment was this corner store. How many of you went to the corner store from your family when you were little, right? I grew up in neighborhoods where there weren't really grocery stores. You did everything at the corner store, right? And so, my mom was sending me to the corner store daily. Walking into the front of this store was my first setup in life. In the very first part of the store, right there, because the checkout, and then they got these little displays, and on the displays here are these little Debbie cakes. And on the Debbie cake rack are these pecan pies. The little pies with the little silver tray, and it's just got whatever goodness they put in there with the pecans, right? It's just still my fave. And I would walk in the store, and I don't even remember how it started. All I know is that as I was shopping, I would open up a pie, put the whole thing in my mouth, chew as fast as I could, swallow it, and stealthily hide the wrappers in the store somewhere, like behind the loaf of bread or in this cooler. It's one of my dumping grounds. And it turned from a pie to several pies to many pies in a single trip. YOLO, right? But on this particular day, I was going through my regular routine and regimen, and as I opened the freezer door to grab a thing of milk, someone was standing behind there. Didn't see him. He grabbed me, started screaming. I started screaming. And believe it or not, like 5 other staff members jumped out of somewhere on top of me and were like, "We got him, we got him." They picked me up, all maybe 40 or 50 pounds of me, marched me to the back of the store, into this little office, and I'm not making this stuff up. In the office was like a chalkboard, and somebody had drawn out like a calendar on this chalkboard. And it had X's on the days that they must have found evidence of a crime. And on the top of this board, it said, "The Pecan Bandit strikes again." And if you think that's bad, the wanted amount was $89. Now, I already told you how old I was when I was born, but I'll date myself a little further. These pecan pies cost a nickel a piece back in those days. I am having disassociation because I refuse to add up the nickel amount that gets you to 89. I'm not doing it. I don't want to know the answer because one of you brainiacs, one of you millennials are going to, "Hey, it's exactly $432. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. It's bad enough as it is. Now they call my father. And back in those days, 89 might as well have been $1 million. Not to mention the humiliation of my father and my family being banned from that store. I go back home. I get the beating of my life. My mother tells me to clean the kitchen as part of my punishment when they go to bed. This was not unusual. Doing chores late into the night was a part of the abuse. But I knew that I wanted to do a really good job. And my father was an actual commercial janitor at that time. He used to clean all the Commonwealth Edison buildings in a region around our home. And so we had the best, most powerful chemicals in the world. And I took all of those chemicals and I put them in a bucket. And I scrubbed the cabinets, the countertops, the bottoms, the floor. Took the stains right out of the sink that have been there forever. And went to bed. I woke up getting another beating of my life. Dragged to the kitchen. The paint on the cupboards had blistered. The tiles on the counter had curled up, as well as on the floor. It was like you just couldn't do anything right. But imagine this. I still go to school the next day. Right? I go to school the next day, and remember what my report card says. I got speech problems, I raise my hand the wrong way, I gotta go to the bathroom too much. And so while people are labeling the behavior, they're not really understanding the behavior. On this picture, I've been a runaway about 3 years at this point. I'm about 14 years old in this picture. And by now, I've been a homeless throwaway kid for at least 4 years. I left home on my 11th birthday and I never went back. The only way I went back was when I was dragged back by the police. And on this particular day, I had been dragged back. I hadn't been home in months. This picture is a tense picture, and moments after this picture, my father and my mother escort me to the living room, and my mom sits on the couch and positions my brothers on the side of her like they are in this picture. And with no warning, my father grabs me. He forces me to my knees. He stands on the back of my leg to pin me to the floor with my arms behind my back. And my mother has a purple Avon brush. And she wants me to tell my brothers that the reason I don't come home is because I don't love them. Now at this point, I have survived all of my mother's beatings, all of her attempts to kill me. And when I call beatings, it's more like torture and near-death experiences. Starvation, humiliation, having to walk around with shit and pissy underwear in my mouth, excuse my language. And if I were to try to throw up, my parents would hold their hands over my mouth to make me have to swallow it. So I know why I don't come home. And they know why I don't come home. But they're trying to change the story. And at this point, I'm fighting back. And I'm telling my mother, you know I don't come home because this is what you do to us. I knew that what was happening to me was already happening to all of us at that point. And she would hit me in the face with the brush. And this lasted for about 30 minutes, but it felt like forever. And eventually I gave in, and I had to say it. The oldest of the younger boys went into a fit, a rage, a lot what my mom looks like. And he started punching me in the face and screaming as soon as I said it. My other youngest brother was crying. And my mother was trying to make him hit me, and he was pulling his hands back. He didn't want to hit me. And she made him hit me. Imagine us going to school the next day. I can tell you what I look like. I had dropped out in the 5th grade, so I wasn't there. And if I would have been there, I would have been cussing out the principal, the teachers, fighting with anyone I could. The older of the youngest boys was a straight-A student. He lettered in all his sports. He even went on to become a federal marshal. The youngest one was quiet, but did his work. Required no supervision. Low-maintenance kid. Invisible almost. And if you're not paying attention, and you don't have the skills, you haven't been taught or told that you need to take a closer look at any of these stories, you just go along thinking you understand that you're seeing exactly what you're seeing. 3 years later, I'm on my way to adult prison at 17 years old. But because of how out of control I was as a juvenile, my own state of Illinois said they couldn't handle me in their correctional system, so they sent me to Indiana. Indiana housed me in a boys' home for 2 years. My first day there, I got my arm broke fighting. I never went home for the holidays like everybody else. The house parents had to stay with me. So by the time I was 17, my own state already knew that I had been a handful. And never mind that a major from the Army came in person to ask the judge to turn me over to his custody rather than send me to prison for my first offense as an adult. And the judge told him, we couldn't do anything with him as a juvenile, but we can do something with him now. And they sent me to prison for a crime I stole a car. And although I stole a car to go save a friend. But none of that matters. Within days of getting into that prison system, I found myself I was already in a gang at this point. You know, as a street kid, I had joined the gang, a Chicago street gang. But I was a nobody. I was a street punk. I was scrawny. I couldn't fight really good, but I was throwing my hands any day I could, though. You know, the mentality of just swinging no matter what the outcome was. You know, that's a very common mentality for us coming out of that neck of the woods. And then I started being groomed by the older players in those prisons. And although I stole the car and I went to prison, I was only supposed to be in prison for 8 months. 3 months into my prison stay, I was trapped in the middle of a race riot between the blacks and the Hispanics fighting white supremacists in a prison called Menard Correctional. And at that point, it didn't matter what gang you were, what mattered what color you were. And if you weren't white, you were going to fight the whites. And if you were white, you were fighting anything that wasn't white. And you weren't fighting, you were fighting to kill. And in this prison system, a lot like you see this balcony, they have armed guards that walk these balconies that can shoot inside the prison and outside the prison. It's a deadly environment. You're not going to fight and get away with it. But we were called to fight. And at that time, I thought I was fighting because of the people standing next to me. And in a way I was, but not for the reason I thought. My gang ties were strong at that time, so I thought I was fighting because I loved these men. And that I would go anywhere and do anything with these men. But when I really take a closer look at my reasons, my image was at play here. I would never want to lock down and live out the rest of my life at that time period being considered a coward. And so I wouldn't be considered a coward. I stayed out. And I fought with these men. And I spent the next 28 months of my life in segregation. In that riot, there were about 15 of us stuck in a cell hall on the lower tier with about 30 white supremacists. I was armed. I had 2 knives. All my friends had knives. All the whites had knives and spears and metal ringers and pipes and you name anything they could rip off the walls. And as soon as we knew the guard was going to leave from the inside to go outside, we knew we were going to fight. And that's exactly what happened. And we started fighting. And in the middle of that fighting, the guard comes back in and he shoots somebody on the upper gallery. And so all of us down below just kind of scattered out of fear from the shots. And when we scattered, I got pinned against the back wall. My friends, the majority of my friends made it towards the out, like where they could escape. And I was pinned there because of the guard shooting. And I knew that as soon as he went back outside, I was trapped alone with the men standing between me and my exit. And I knew at this time I was going to die. As soon as the guard comes out, we start fighting again. And an unarmed black man, who I knew but barely, jumped into the fight to try to help me. He didn't owe that to me. I cannot explain to you why he did that. And within seconds of that, the guard comes back in and a shot rings out. I have 2 knives. I'm fighting a group of 30 armed white men. And the man who gets shot is the black guy who is unarmed. And at that point, you're not thinking in terms that you're thinking in right now. You're just blank and numb. But I knew enough that if I were to leave him there, they would drag him in and finish him off as soon as they could. And so even though the guard was threatening to shoot me, I grabbed my friend and I dragged him 150 cells to the other side of the building. And the superintendent walks in, and he's acting like a warden at this point. The whole prison is fighting. The whole prison is in disarray. And he walks in with a bunch of guards, 10 or 15 guards protecting him. And I beg him and I ask him over and over to take this man to the hospital. And all he kept saying is, no one's coming in, no one's going out. Unacceptable. My hands were so bloody that the knives that I was holding fell out of my hand at that moment. And all I had left were my fists. And so I hit that man. And I started another round of fighting, this time the inmates against the guards. And we overpowered the guards, we took control of that cell hall, and we forced our way to the hospital. And by that time, that man was dead. And I spent the 28 months in that unit. And in that time, I was more violent than I was even in that moment. I set a man on fire who was next to me. We were constantly going to the yard, and every chance we got, we were trying to kill each other until they had to start segregating the prison by race, which is against constitutional law, state law, supreme law. But that was all they could do to control us. And then the older men in this prison started playing on my experience. I only know that now. But they started feeding me truths, but for the wrong reason, with the wrong intention. What I had just encountered was unadulterated racism, hatred, violence, death. And they preyed on that. And they drove me to become more extreme and more extreme. I went in there, a 17-year-old punk, was supposed to walk out 18 years old, walked out 22 years old. Now I'm a gang leader, and now I'm an extremist. Now I have muscle, I have money, I have guns. And I hit the streets and I go crazy. And in that time period, my children were born. And I can tell you right now, I had no connection, no meaningful connection to them. I'd write my son letters and tell him, your dad's taking care of the nation's business. You'll understand when you get older. I got out of prison suddenly. There was no prep. It was just, I got out one day, they said, you're going home. I didn't even know it was my out date. 2 weeks later, I'm on the run for trying to kill a man in broad daylight in front of a bunch of people. I run to Wisconsin. I commit a bunch of crimes, a bunch of gang activity, but I'm also pursuing this hatred of whites that I've developed in prison. On any given day, on any given occasion, I would attack random white people for being white and being present. I had this hatred. And I had this hatred for cops, for government. We were targeting law enforcement. We were targeting police. We were targeting detectives. And while we had a mission, that mission really was purposeless. It was a dead-end path. And within 8 or 9 months, I'm on my way back to Wisconsin prison. I'm in a new state, new prison. I was facing 160 years for 8 counts of armed robbery. I pled out to 6 counts of armed robbery for 6 years each. And I was blessed that they were ran concurrent, which means I had 6 sentences, but they were all going to run at the same time. I was afraid that they were going to run them so that I would end up doing 36 years. But for whatever reason, the judge had mercy on me. But I'll tell you, at that time, I thought I was just that smart. I was just that slick. And instead of going home in 2 years, I didn't go home for another 7. And I went to that prison system, and I beat up more guards. I had more inmates taken out. In fact, I was just kind of laughing, not because I'm insensitive, just because of the memory. But a friend of mine who still works in corrections in Wisconsin sent me an email 2 days ago and said, 23 years ago, you kicked off a riot in Green Bay Correctional Institution. Everywhere I went. It was to the point. It was to the point where towards the end of my stay in Wisconsin Corrections, I was being transferred because an inmate felt threatened by me, and he was being threatened by me and my friends, and so they rightfully transferred me in order to prevent anything happening to him. And when we get to the new prison, they see that it's me. And mind you, out of these 7 years, I've been in the hole about 5. And I've been transferred 17 times at this point. And most of those years I spent in what's called the basement, in the greenhouse in Waupun Correctional Institution. These are 6 control cells that are buried underneath the segregation unit that are reserved for Wisconsin's most violent inmates. So by the time I get to this other prison, they see that it's me about to step off the bus, and the prison security director actually said, he cannot come here. We're not equipped to take that inmate. And they put me back on the bus. Now, on one hand, you would think that as a criminal, as a convict, as a gang leader, that would somehow be another notch on my belt. And to my friends, it was. But as a human being, as a man that I still was, but wasn't in touch with, that was a deeply shaming moment. As a child, I had nowhere to go, and now as an adult, the one place that is supposed to have to take me are refusing me. I had nowhere to go. Now, professionals, imagine yourself sitting across from these faces. When I got to the Department of Corrections in Wisconsin, we have to go to a town called Dodge. And there in Dodge, you have to meet a psychiatrist. It's mandatory. You're going to meet with the psychiatrist. I was 22 at the time, or 23 at the time when I met the psychiatrist. And after talking to me for about 5 minutes, I found out maybe 20 years later that my diagnosis at that time was incorrigible. Sociopath with homicidal ideations. Do you guys know what incorrigible means? Incapable of change. Now, I've made a strong case against myself, of course. And if you were looking at this file of this man, you might see the same thing too. You might. But there are many others in the world who saw something different. And that comes in a moment. Let's fast forward here, though, to a recent event in Florida. How many of you guys remember this picture? After Charlottesville, Richard Spencer decided to go to Gainesville, Florida for a white supremacy rally, for an alt-right rally. And this white supremacist is walking through the crowd of protesters. He got there late, unfortunately, and the doors were closed. And now he basically had to do the Soul Train walk through all the protesters in his Nazi skinhead regalia. And look at how they're treating him. Now, I want you to know something. I am ready for any fight at this point. Any fight. The tougher, the better. The harder you are on me, the less you're going to get from me. Look familiar? This crowd is punching him. This guy refused to defend himself. And he walked through that crowd with that smile that you see on his face. As they hit him, they were sticking him in the shins and in the forearms with sharp objects, punching him, spitting on him, pushing him, threatening him, screaming. And I think where our ideologies relate today is that if we treat people the way they're acting, how are we any different? if we adopt the values and the conduct of the people we're supposed to be trying to face, how are we any different? But what if we were to see something further down the road for this person rather than the moment in time that they're stuck in? The human potential. Which of those philosophies would better suit us, better serve us? Are we better off finding people incorrigible? We don't have the death penalty in Wisconsin. And what if somebody had been able to do that for me at any point in my life? The type of hatred that is easy to see is when people behave like me. The type of hatred that is hard to see is when we hide it behind professionalism. And then we use the words and the codes to justify our hatred. When we project our personal dislike and contempt of someone and someone's behavior, and we harness the power of our pens and our opinions on those people. When we wield power at the expense of someone else. And there has to be limits and there have to be boundaries. But if we take the humanity out of the decision making, out of the boundaries, out of the limits, then all you get, the end result, is condemnation. Us versus them. I'm going to share with you a project that we're working on in transition moving forward. Bear with me. This is about a minute and a half. This project came out of what we're seeing right now in media, at these rallies, and what I talked about masking hate behind these veils of deception, I should say. It gets really hard to be able to call it out when you hear dog whistles, or it seems packaged in such a way that it's palatable. And what we heard when we started trying to figure out how to counter hate speech and hate behavior was that these hate groups, these hate messages are protected speech. And so if we want to, on one hand, fight for civil rights for some, are we going to make exclusions for others and still say we're fighting for civil rights? So we didn't want to join the others in calling for censorship, which is a slippery slope. We didn't want to be a part of this condemnation effort, to pull down sites and black out, these messages. We didn't want to be a part of that. But what I'll tell you what worked for me, what changed me is a part of this idea that we're doing now. So how did I get from there to here? It started with about 5 years into my prison sentence. I had already beat up some guards. I had been in the hole a long time. I was at a breaking point. I was spending my days in segregation strapped to a steel cot an inch off the floor in a paper gown and being hand-fed personally by majors and captains of corrections on a daily basis. And then one day, there was a knock on my door. Now, let's put this into perspective. I'm in a maximum security prison, and inside of that maximum security, in the middle of it, is a triple segregation security unit. And underneath that security unit is the basement. And it's a control cell. And no one knocks on your door, first of all. That doesn't happen. It's weird, to say the least. And it's so weird that it makes you question what you just heard, even though you know you just heard it. Now at this point, I'm totally just an asshole. So I have no manners. I'm not like, who is it? No. And then something totally left field happens. A voice says, I'd like to talk to you. That's even weirder than the knock. Because no one is talking to me. I haven't talked to another human being in months, if not years. And then he says, it gets weirder. I want to tell you a story. At this point, I'm like, excuse my language, get the f out of here. Because I'm like so, this is truly, I thought I've lost my mind. Up until this point, I felt sane, which is crazy in and of itself. It wasn't until this happened that I thought I was losing my mind. And we have to go through all these hoops and hurdles to get to his office because it's an ordeal to move me out of that cell. It is a major ordeal. Video cameras, there's several administrative offices that got to sign off on just opening the door. To get my food in there was a chore, much less to walk me out. But to get me out of there, they handcuff me, strap me around my waist, handcuff my feet, connect my hands to my feet, put a mask over my face, and I have 4 guards who are holding me up by the elbows, walking me backwards. I'm barely touching the floor. Which is to the other side of the prison, so it took about a good 10 minutes of this exercise. But it was the most human contact and fresh air I've had in a long time. And I get to this man's cell, and I'm seeing him for the first time, and it's this little gray Yogi Bear looking guy. Gray hair, long ponytail. And he says, take all that off of him. Now at this point, I have to tell you, I don't know why, but I didn't want them to. Because I had this compulsion to kill him. I wanted to kill him. And something inside of me didn't want to. But it was my opportunity. After they huddled and determined that he was in charge, they took it off. And then he tells them to leave me in the room with him alone. At this point in my life, I'm about 27 years old. And he tells me a story about how a boy becomes a man. I knew in that moment that was the first time in my life anyone had ever told me a story. I went back to my cell.
A few months later, I beat up 4 more guards. But this time, it wasn't sitting right with me after the fact. And I beat up the guard because one of the guards had called me a racial slur in the day room in front of a bunch of inmates. That was enough for me. When I went to the hall, I wrote him a letter, and I said, "What did you do to me? Who gave you the right to mess with my head?" Because I felt guilty about some of the violence, not all of it at this point, but hey, it was a start, right? And I felt guilty about some of the violence. And he wrote me back, and he was like, "Doesn't matter what you do, I'll never stop loving you." I met a woman by the name of Susan Balk out of St. Louis. She runs an organization called Hate Breakers. I encourage all of you to look it up. And on this occasion, I was receiving an award from the World History Museum in St. Louis for some of our efforts in combating violent extremism. And I met her very young great-nephew. I think he was about 20 years old. And while we were all getting ready to head out to the museum, he tells me this story. He says, my great-grandparents were Germans. And a German constable asked my great-grandparents to hide a Jewish family that was scheduled to be executed the next day. And this Jewish family were two adults and 2 children, and this German family were 2 adults and 2 children. And as you can imagine, their apartment was very small, but not only was it very small, it also operated as a storefront, and not only was it a storefront, it sat across the street from a German police station. And those German children went to school every day for 2 years, hiding the fact that there was a Jewish family being hidden in their home. Eventually, that family, 2 years later, escaped Germany and execution. And that young man said, I don't know what I would have done if I was my great-grandparents. But what they did do was show me what is possible. What I'm doing is showing you what is possible. What you're doing is showing people what is possible. The other formers in this room are showing us what's possible. Those of you who have no stakehold owed in this fight, but who are here, are showing us what is possible. And it is only through compassion that I've demonstrated in this story. And we can see what happens in the absence of compassion, in the absence of empathy. Who is responsible for my outcome? I alone? Did I become a monster by myself? Did I become a man that I am today by myself? My community either plays a part in my failure or my success as much as I do. And in many ways, when we see further down the road for others than they can at that moment, do we not have an obligation, a responsibility to love a person right out of that rather than hate them further into it? In this day and time, the majority of violent extremism that is happening on U.S. soil is coming from white supremacy groups. But if you only pay attention to the news and media, and perhaps even government narratives, you would think it was the Muslims. You would think it was ISIS. You would think it was the Mexicans who only send their worst over here. In the last 10 years, 74% of all the violent acts of extremism on U.S. soil have come from the far violent right. Half of them come from an ideology of white supremacy, while the other half comes from an anti-government stance like Timothy McVeigh, with white supremacy leanings. But what Life After Hate embodies, the culture of our understanding of how to influence and affect change within these members and within these groups. Our country is writing those people off right now.
Our communities are asking us, what should we do? And I want you to know what that question implies. We're about to give up. What our We Counter Hate Twitter program is bearing witness. When that man knocked on my door, he was bearing witness. When we reach into these prisons, we're bearing witness. We bring accountability. I went from one of the most violent inmates in the Wisconsin system to leading the charge of effective change. Our re-entry program was operating for 3 years. Year 1, Year 2, and Year 3 had a 6% recidivism rate with those high-risk offenders. Because we learned to show and express the language and the empathy even within systems that are as giant as mountains. We think we can't do anything about this, so we become hopeless. We think we see enough of the picture to be able to make a broad and general assessment of it. But in reality, we only see fragments of any one person's personal experience. And we have to be mindful that there's always more to what we're seeing. Whether it's violent far-right, gangs, addicts, whatever, you name it. And before we can start to listen to others, we have to know how we are listening to ourselves. You have to know the way you're telling yourself your story. It matters. I never gave up. But more importantly, you can't afford to give up on someone either. You can't. If we start to give up on even one person, it says more about us than that person. When we want to connect the dots, it means that it has to come from a place of our humanity. The way we were born into this world, feeling and loving for others, and finding ourselves in others. Look at that. The way it worked for me is the way it worked for him. When that psychiatrist wrote me off as incorrigible, I want you to understand the systemic representation that finding has on them. We have to change the way these systems are designed if we're even going to see better results in our programs. When we see things like this, what happens to us? But even more so, if you're thinking this in your mind while listening to someone, what are you about to do to them? Oftentimes when we focus on the problem, we have no idea what the possible solutions could be. I'm going to suggest that you follow the 20-80 rule in your practice. Spend 20% of the time finding out what the problems are and 80% trying to figure out what you and that person brings to the table to help solve it. Not what brought you to the table, but what you bring to the table. If you're trying to understand behavior, you need to be asking yourself a couple of questions. What is this person really saying? Why is he looking so angry? Why is he being so violent? Why is he in that group? We need to try to understand that, and we need to know that there is a complaint in there somewhere. There is a complaint. And how many of you appreciate when someone listens to your grievance, to your complaint, right? If someone is resisting your efforts to help them, don't become resistant back. Understand that that's what you're signing up for. If you're working with inmates, you're signing up for that. How am I going to be an AODA counselor and get mad when my client uses or relapses? Like, I signed up for that. If you run a daycare, you gotta like kids. Right? And you're going to clean up some poop, right? You're going to clean up some puke, right? You're going to Kid's going to throw a tantrum, right? Like, you signed up for that. All of a sudden, you're angry and abusing them. We can no longer afford to say that we would have better results if we had better enemies. Just can't. We must address their grievance in some way. And in order to address the grievance, you have to be willing to dig for it. You have to be willing to understand what's behind the behavior. And once you understand that, you can help that person start to tear down the way that they're telling themselves their story and put it back together in a way that can actually be constructive. But see, the problem with listening today is that those of us on this side of things feel that if we listen, then in some way we're conceding. That's a myth. That's not what listening means. But I know it can feel that way when you're standing there and someone is just vomiting out their grievance on you, maybe even taking it out on you, and you feel like if you just stand there and take it, then in some way you're losing ground. I actually had a therapist tell me, what are we supposed to do? Become walking carpets for these guys to walk on? And imagine this person in an office with the client who thinks that way. Holy shit. Let me do your review now. Right? Like you need help. And there's no such thing as burnout. Let me just get that off. This is not about burning out because you're working with people. You burn out because you don't take care of yourself, not because of the work you do. A candle doesn't lose power from lighting another candle, as they say, right? You burn out because you take it personal. You take it home. And there's no one who's mentoring you, even at 70 or 80 years old, through your profession anymore. So you take it out on the person. No, there is no such thing. I've been doing this for almost 20 years. People have been telling me I need to slow down. Well, when do I look fatigued? I'm standing up here on a broken leg. I'm not stopping yet. Because when you do what you love what you do, and nothing can stop you from that. This idea of collective shaming. I was very keen to how you talked about me being a person in prison. You used very careful words, and that's important. We talked about that in formers. We talked about that in our practice. I talked about that in the 12-step world. Collective shaming is when we talk about things that are broad sweeping and broad stroking entire groups of people, civilizations, and cultures. And in many ways, part of the grievance from the far right is that there are people, especially in the alt-right movement, the so-called alt-right movement, is that, look, I'm too young to have anything to do with Nazi Germany. My parents didn't have anything to do with Nazi Germany. My parents didn't own any slaves. I didn't own any slaves. So why do I have to take stock of my entire culture? Because of what somebody else did who I don't even know. But then even in institutions, we talk about, to people who are captive audiences like this, that about white pride and white guilt and white shame. And when you talk about white guilt, that you're guilty just because you're white, that is shaming. And guess what? It might get a couple of you to the table, but the majority of you are not going to respond to that. So we even have to find better ways to talk about racism and bigotry and slavery so that we're not pushing people away and we're not coming off as judgmental. The alt-right taught us that. But see, we couldn't have figured out that what we were doing wrong in some way, shape, or form until we bothered to stop and listen to what they had to say. And none of this implies that we're co-signing anything they believe. It's helping us understand how they think, which is helping us construct ways of intervening. And so listening to somebody is about validating the person, not their experience. When George came to my cell and knocked out of respect, do you think he was saying, I'm okay with all the crimes and all the people you've hurt? Absolutely not. And I never once thought that that's what he was saying. But it felt different. It felt loving, and I still didn't know how to accept it. And then when he told me the story, that I had value for him to take the time to do that.
all it did was tell me that I was worth something to him. In a world where I felt like I was worthless. And a lot of the far-right stuff that we're seeing in life after hate right now, these men and women, no matter how far from reality it may be or isn't, they feel like they are not worth anything right now, that they have lost their value. And like me, when I felt I lost my value, I was willing to go to the extremes to get it back. As we conclude, I want to say again, thank you, AVP, this campus, all of you, all your volunteers. I want to recognize the formers in this audience for being here as well. I identify with you. I'm easy to find, I'm easy to get a hold of, but not easy to talk to in this day and age. Miriam can attest to that. That woman right there, Julie, is responsible for getting messages that are critical to me. Like, she's like, you gotta respond to this guy. I'm not doing it because I'm lazy, I'm just overwhelmed. We are overwhelmed with work. Our organization lost that $500,000, and after Charlottesville, we've raised almost $1 million. Our philosophies do align, Miriam, and Life After Hate wants to support the work that you do, lend our experience and learn from your organization as well and your efforts, and find ways to partner deeply in the future. Me and Julie were brainstorming that over dinner, and I'm going to take that back to my team, and we're going to find a way to strengthen each other. At this point in the presentation, and thank you for being so patient and sitting through this, I want to open it up for questions and comments. Feel free to ask whatever on your heart and your mind. I have no problems addressing any of that. Thank you. So, questions? She's coming with a microphone.
Way over here.
We just want them to hear you too.
How did that guy come about to visit you? Did you know him?
No, I did not know him. He was, his name was George. His name is George. George was, at that time, I didn't know this, he's the psychiatrist for the institution as well as the hostage negotiator. What I found out several years, many years later, almost a decade later, 12 years later as a matter of fact, was that he heard rumors that the prison, he had overheard guards talking about killing me because of the problems I was creating. And I was very problematic. There was a reason I was down there in that basement. I was very violent. And he chose to intervene against their wishes and actually probably saved my life. I didn't know this at the time, but he sent me to a group for anger management, but where he sent me was a mental health facility for corrections. So basically, I'm pretty sure he had to give me a diagnosis of being psychotic. And I probably was, didn't know it, nobody does at that time, right? But it was through that process that things started to happen for me. So, and I'm happy to tell you that George has more or less adopted me as his nephew. And out of respect for his family, not his son, because he has sons. And I can tell you, me and George have the relationship that I think anyone would love to have with any parent, with anybody. And he's been in my life ever since. So that was, I met George in 1994. And we're still in touch to this day. Question over here to my left.
I think I got like 3 questions.
One at a time so I don't forget them all.
Yeah, how are your brothers?
You know, I'm really sad to say I'm the only one that's really changed.
My mom was successful at turning my brothers against me. And my sister and I were always close as children. But as we got older, I think our problems drove us apart because, she had, effects from the abuse as well, right? So it was just hard to live with each other. So the brother who's youngest, just under me, Joey, the one who became a federal marshal, he hated me my mom did a very effective job of never letting him bond with me from the time he was born. My younger brother, it took my mom about 15 years before she was able to kind of turn him against me. And the type of lives that they live, the type of drama and the way the family culture is there, it literally is sickening to me. Like, I get nauseous, I get sick, it brings up all these bad feelings. I mean, I feel like I have an upset stomach when I get around them, so I have to stay far away. Probably maybe a little bit, like 6 or 7 years now, when I found out about my brother, my sister knew about that all this time and kept that from me. And so that was kind of like a shocking revelation for me because I didn't think we had those kind of secrets. How do you hide a life from somebody for 45 years? And I just can't interact with them. Not healthy for me.
That goes into my next question, like, how are you able to stand up there, Like, how are you able to, how does it feel for you? Like, does it feel like, do you go back and, like, deal with all this? Is this, like, how,
So really what we're talking about is this concept. In Formers, we have 3 pillars. We have forgiveness, reconciliation, and redemption. My process of change started with forgiveness. And my book, Forbears, is a wordplay on a word that means forbearance. Forbearance means to forgive a debt without cause. Because the shit that I've endured from my family, being raped at 3 by my mom's brother with my sister, my mom knowing about it, her whole family not defending us or protecting us, not to mention the abuse, not to mention what she did to my brother. Those things are painful, but it's not the kind of pain that controlled me in the way it did before. Through forgiveness, it means that I recognize the limits of my control in that situation, and it's not for me to want payment or to seek payment from anyone concerning those matters. In fact, what I've learned even more is that even if somebody tried to pay me back for what was done to me, what could they actually give me that would make that better? So it's a pointless search. Right? It's a pointless endeavor to look for payment and reconciliation in that way. And once I realized that what I was holding on to, although it was priceless in this hand, it was worthless in this hand. And by giving that away, it allowed me to have a future. But it also allowed me to identify with my mom because as a part of my change process, I was asked by my therapist who was helping me at this time if I had ever hurt anyone the way my mother had hurt me. And all I could do was say yes. And up until that moment before I answered that question, I thought I was different from my mom. And I blamed my mother for everything I had done. So at the time that I realized like I had become even worse than my mother and by my own standards for the things I had done, I had abandoned my children. I had hurt innocent people. I had hurt people who I felt at that time had it coming. And I had to reconcile that within myself as well. But at the end of the day, what I realized that if I wanted a life, if I needed to have some freedom from that type of weight and pressure, I had to find a way to forgive my mom. And by identifying with her and then not feeling like I'm the one who needs to go collect what she owes me, it allowed me to move forward in my life. It is painful to remember because they're real wounds, right? But they're not festering. I know how to heal and soothe myself. I'm surrounded by people who love me and who nourish me and who nurture me. I have a great relationship with my children today, and I thrive on that. So that through forgiveness, it's allowed me to start reconciling, right? Because I also, by identifying with her, I realized I owed a debt to people. In the beginning, when I started doing my talking way back when, I was up here out of guilt and shame. Today, I'm up here because I feel I have something to offer. The energy has changed substantially. But don't get me wrong, it's not that I feel like I've paid my debt. I haven't, which is why I'm involved in service work. But it's also the reason for me recognizing that guilt and shame are not the same thing as remorse. Guilt and shame will have you go inside yourself in a destructive way. Remorse has you coming outside of yourself and trying to heal those around you. And that's exactly why I'm here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question in the back over here?
What happened to the man in the Nazi t-shirt?
So, we have been talking about my life and how compassion changed my life. And in the middle of that, towards the end of that rally, as he was getting closer to the end, there were two men who were screaming at him. And one of the men felt compelled to ask him a question. And so he grabbed the guy like in a bear hug, and he asked the man, "Why do you hate me?" His name is Randy. And Randy replied, for an unknown reason, "I don't know." And that created a pathway for dialogue. And on that day, that same day, that man walked away from his white supremacy beliefs and groups and became friends with the gentleman who's now helping him. When we heard the story, we reached out right away to support Randy further along his process of change. And I'll tell you right now, Randy is having a hell of a time for two reasons. He's dealing with a meth addiction. He's dealing with narcotics for medication that he needs to take, and alcohol. Recently went to jail for a blackout, and he was domestically violent with his wife. He's now been ordered out of his house, so he's living in his truck. Homeless, barely working. He lives in a very rural area, about 40 or 50 miles from anything of relevance. And because of his persona before his change, he is known as being that guy. And so he's even been refused medical attention at this point. And so it's bleak. And really the only thing that he has is us. And even so, there's only so much we can do in such a heavy load there. And so again, sometimes just bearing witness with someone and trying to stay as close as you can with someone is about all you can do until things get better.
Just hearing your story often it reminds me of this quote about forgiveness, and the quote goes something like this: "Your ability to forgive will definitely determine the quality of your life." And just hearing your story really means a lot. It does.
Thank you.
Also, I'm a fan of PK and Pie myself too.
Thank you. You know, one of the things to kind of talk a little bit more, because it was more than just realizing I related with my mom. When I started to, there's layers to this idea, right? So if you're a professional or someone who's engaging with trying to get people to think about changing, just getting them to be willing to think about it, right? So if the goal is to be sober, if the goal is to be nonviolent, whatever the goal is, just if the goal is to forgive something, just getting them to even think about thinking about it is the beginning place for most of us, right? And so we try to jump into the conversation, but we haven't even tested the waters to see if they're willing to have the conversation or even think about having it. And if I can get them to say, "Hey, I'm willing to think about it," then that's a major step forward, because we've went from no to I'll think about it, right? And when I was thinking about forgiveness, I realized I had a lot of beliefs about forgiveness that were really more like myths. And I call them myths because many people have had them. For example, that forgiveness has something to do with the other person. Right? That's a myth. It might have something to do with them if that's a part of your process, but it doesn't have to. So if I'm unwilling or afraid or can't face the other person or it's impossible, then I'm stuck. right? I'm stuck. Now I can't complete it, or if the other person has to acknowledge it or accept it. When I went and told my mom I forgave her, which was a mistake, she said, for what? Now what? Now what am I going to do with that? Well, F you, man, because, now you ain't taking it, so I'm taking it back, right? If it depends on these things, if it depends on these outcomes, it's intangible. And so forgiveness, in many ways, has to have no strings attached to it. I mean that. No, you can't do it for anything else other than healing. And I think another myth that has come out of this is that forgiveness has something to do with the past. My past is heavy. And we haven't even gotten to all the details of it, right? But as soon as I started thinking about doing something, having something, being something different, it didn't seem so daunting. But I had to choose between living in the past or finding the future. And I chose to live in the future. Now, I took all that stuff with me, but inertia will teach you that there is such a thing called friction. And as you continue to move with objects, the natural friction that occurs from movement starts to wear some of that off of you. It starts to thin it out. So if I'm dragging a bag mile after mile, eventually that bag starts to tear. Some of that stuff starts to fall off as I figure other things out. The idea is to get movement in life, because time doesn't stand still. If you think about it, if I'm thinking about what happened in 1969, and I'm thinking about it in a way today that makes it feel like 1969 is today, then it doesn't feel like this much time is between those events. It feels like this much time is in events. And if I'm thinking about it like it's happening today, what does that mean about my growth and development? Right? I'm not growing and I'm not developing in a healthy way. And so it's not that I'm stuck in 1969. When you think about it, life continues to move forward. And if I'm not moving forward myself, I get left further and further behind. And that in of itself is a scary, anxiety-ridden perspective in life, which can either paralyze you or motivate you. And so when I got out of prison, let me tell you, went to school, got an associate's, got a bachelor's, got a master's degree, bought a house, bought the Hummer I wanted, got the Mastiff I wanted. Like, I was moving fast because I knew I was so far behind. And now I've caught up and I still don't know what to do with myself. Like, I have everything I wanted, everything I set a goal for, all the things. I'm living out my dreams, I'm living out my goals, and I'm looking on to the next. And in many ways, that is a fulfilling life. But I only made that life because instead of seeing wreckage, I saw material in my past. And I've built my life from all that wreckage. That's the only way. We have to change the way we talk about these events so that they mean something that can uplift us. Because the things that held you down will one day hold you up if you allow them to. How many more questions do we got? I want to be courteous to the audience. Maybe two more? We'll take this one and then these two.
Could you were talking about systems of violence, and I'm wondering, beyond kind of interpersonal interaction, how do we go about, kind of dismantling and replacing those systems of violence?
Can you tell me what you're thinking about when you talk about that? What are you thinking about? You said when we want to work. What systems are you thinking about? How can I make this pertain to you?
I think it could be applied in a lot of different ways. I think, culturally in the U.S., as a man, I think there's a lot of, kind of male violence, so you could speak on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you see, I can cry today. My girls tease me. I was actually crying at, what was it? Kung Fu Panda 2. Because there's a scene at the end of Kung Fu Panda 2. I'm going to tell you how this went. Youngest, oldest, me. Towards the end of the movie, Kung Fu Panda said, the wise turtle in Kung Fu Panda says, your life did not have a beautiful beginning. but you have a beautiful life now. And I was crying. Both my kids did this. Because they knew. Masculinity is often talked about in terms of our willingness to be aggressive and violent. And we're often humiliated in society for not being aggressive and violent. And then we're taught that the only way to remove the humiliation is to demonstrate aggression and violence. That's one. Two, we're also raised to not value women. How do we know this? When we talk about women as men, and I'm talking about like undeveloped, immature men. When we talk, and particularly like in street life, criminal world, when we talk about women as a weaker entity. And how do we demonstrate that? By referring to other men as women, right? And so we start to use these degrading feministic terms towards women, or towards men, to equate them with femininity. As if to say that the very worst thing that a man could be is a woman. And so if the very worst thing that a man can be is a woman, how can a man have a healthy relationship with a woman from that standpoint? So we have to correct those two things. We have to recognize that physical and self-discipline is a sign of masculinity and maturity. And that respect for women is a sign of masculinity and maturity. And then being able to model and demonstrate that we ourselves are not these cowboys who ride off into the sun on a horse by ourselves with nothing to lose, because we have feelings. I'm divorced. My ex-wife is trying to take my children to Atlanta. I'm fighting for my kids. And the only statement I say, and I have my kids 50-50. They're with me every week, 50-50. And the only thing I say is, I just want to be a father and present in my child's life. And I think there's this idea that, and we kind of perpetrate it, that men cannot be as close to their children as their mothers. That fathers cannot be as close to their children. And that's true if you don't spend the time, right? So I didn't have any attachment to my two children that were born while I was in prison, because I was in prison. I had no physical attachment. No time was committed to that. But now that I've changed and I've been present every single waking moment of their lives, and I can tell you what they wear and what they drink, and that I was the first one that they told about their period, and I got and when they try to buy the panties with the words on them, no. And when they need their tampons, I have to go in the store and FaceTime them to figure out which one you know what? This is a part of masculinity for me today. And I think we have to redefine the parameters of what it is. So you're speaking my language right there. And a part of my mistake in my rearing is that the streets teach you to be superior. You can never be equal, and you can't just get even. You have to be superior. And that in that pursuit of being superior, you're always having to one-up others. But then I talked about my image, and your image is never as strong as it was yesterday, and so you always need to even one-up yourself. And so there's this complete escalation in your devolution, because the crazier you are, the more masculine you are. Right? That we have to shed those ideas, and we have to show our sons, and we have to show our daughters their value by, one, being present, and then teaching them these lessons that I've just shared, just kind of in a very general way. I hope that helps answer your question. And when you talk about systems, you have to express compassion for those systems. Look, I'm not happy with this administration, but I can't afford to go on my social media platforms and condemn them and then say that I'm trying to work with the violent far right. So I even have to find ways of trying to work with the administration to help dismantle some of the things that I'm not happy with, while not condemning them, but while not conceding my points at all. We have to, that's a hard position to take. But that's why Life After Hate is very unique right now, because we haven't condemned anyone, but we've made our points very clear. No one's confusing us for being sympathetic.
Hi, my name is Monica. Thanks so much for sharing your story. I'm actually from Orange County, California, so I'd like to apologize from all of us for your leg.
It's okay.
All right. So part of peace building I see is also, policy change activism, being on the streets, and I see that you are meeting those needs too. And when we're at a city council meeting, especially in Orange County, it's the front lines of the immigration battle in this country. Los Alamitos, a city 10 minutes from my house, is suing the state of California because of its sanctuary laws. And so President Trump meets with the mayor of a city of 30,000 people, to make a point. And so this is the front lines. When we go to our city council meetings, we confront these hate groups that, to me, I'm not a drug or alcohol specialist, but they seem high on something. And they're also have emotional problems. Some people have mental illnesses or are mentally delayed. So this is our opposition, right? We're not talking about two let's say, rational actors, the way I've learned in peace building school, right? We're talking about people that have, it's really complex.
Sure.
On drugs, mental stuff, anger stuff, and we're in the middle of it right there. So I'm just wondering how do you prioritize a response? What do you want to, if you want to be out there, with the activists, because peace builders need to be right there, training nonviolence on the streets. Otherwise, we're really not going to have any effect, because those people don't have time to go to our workshops. So what should we prioritize? What should we do?
Well, I'm not going to talk about specifics, and I'll be in Orange County. You should talk to Julie. I'll be in Orange County in a couple of weeks at an event that I think is open to the public that you might want to come to, because we're starting to roll out some major programming between Orange County and San Diego. That's where, because there's a large white supremacy build happening there now. It's about perspective and philosophy, if you ask me. It's not about, see, when I went into the reentry program, I knew what I was facing, but I knew what philosophy, what theoretical approach I was taking. And so we can make it simple and say compassion and empathy in your own conduct and behavior, right? So when I say don't concede, but don't condemn, right? What we're facing right now is really a fallout from the unforeseen negative consequences of civil rights movement for the last 50 years. All right, I want to make sure that's clear. We're talking about the unforeseen negative consequences of our actions as civil rights leaders, right? The civil rights movement. What do I mean by that? What we did in civil rights did a lot of collective shaming. It's not that the issues we were calling out weren't valid, it's the way we did it that caused harm and then caused dissension, because in part it was condemnation. The alt-right recognizes that, and the alt-right has learned from the civil rights movement how to talk about their position. Civil rights, now we're the minorities, now we're disenfranchised, now we're being prejudiced against, blah, 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 right? And again, it doesn't matter how close or far from reality it is. That's their grievance. Remember I said you got to listen to it. You got to know what they're complaining about. At that point, they also then started to use civil rights and constitutional advancements to hide behind, to be able to say and do the things that they do. What we're doing now is getting frustrated, and really we're seeing Antifa-type behavior, where the frustration of being nonviolent all the time. Like, some of us are sick and tired of being nonviolent. I'll just put it that way. However, the answer isn't violence. I'm all about protesting. I think there's a place for that in civilized society. I think we have to bear witness. I think we need movements, but our protests need to be more intelligent and targeted at the right things that actually make a difference, right? Some of the things that we're seeing in St. Louis have the idea, but are going in a direction that looks too much like failed violence, right? And anger. It's kind of like unacquitted anger. It's just being spewed out. Now, I'm not against what they're standing for, but we have to be mindful of the impact that this has once it's over and what people take away. People aren't taking away the message that they're intending. The results of their actions are not what they hoped to accomplish. So again, you have to look at the results of the system the way it's designed. We can't afford to give up our position that we took when we became civil rights activists. I want to say that to you guys. You cannot give that space up. This is not the time to abandon it because you think it doesn't work. It is more important now than ever before. But what we can't afford to do is start condemning people. Right? We want to condemn them because they're violent, because they're racist, and because they're bigoted, and because they're powerful. If we condemn them, we are only increasing the gap between us. And the conversation, there is no dialogue at this point. So if you can inspire, if you can be willing to listen, then you can inspire dialogue. The guy that was at the rally got hugged and asked, "Why do you hate me?" The guy said, "I don't know." These two guys start talking. The dialogue matters. That became a national event. Life After Hate has been saying that for years. I've been saying that for decades, right? This idea that we have to get to a place where we can talk dialogue means that we have to be disciplined enough and mature enough, going back to our point, to be able to withstand what's coming at us without resorting to the same tactics. So it's, no matter what you say, no matter what you do, I would say, under a very complex theory here, do not concede. And in the process, do not condemn. Stand up for what you believe in, but don't destroy or try to dismantle another person's humanity in the process. I just don't think there's another way. These are complex issues with no simple solution, but we have to hold the moral high ground of civil rights movement, if you ask me. And I think there's one more question before we wrap up.
My name's Barry, and I am a former, and I've been out just recently for 9 months.
Welcome home, brother.
Thank you, thank you. And my question is about family. I'm estranged from my two daughters. They're 20 and 24 now, and I have not been in their life since they were 1 and 4 because of my actions. And so they just are resistant to everything that I do to reach out. And I have been a changed person through my incarceration, but they don't want to listen. And they're just non-receptive. And being the person that you are, maybe you can guide me in a direction that I don't get discouraged over it. I don't allow their dislike of me change who I am today, but it had changed who I have been in the past, where I had an effort attitude and just throw it all in, right? And just, okay, I'm getting mine. You know what I'm saying? And so it's a real personal question, but you have something that I see that you have resolved and you're determined. I'd like some information from you on that level.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that vulnerability and transparency right there. And welcome home again, brother, for sure. I hope you have the tolerance to hear what I'm going to say, because it does start with us, okay? You are not the victim in this situation. They are. They are. How long are you willing to demonstrate your sincerity to win them back?
Forever.
So then that resolves half of your question. Because they don't owe you forgiveness. You don't have a right to reconciliation. These are gifts. My son was sentenced to 11 years by the same judge that sent me to prison at 17 when he was 17. And the immediate reaction was guilt and shame, and anger and rage. And then I drove 8 hours to go visit him after being approved, and then when I got there and they realized who I was, they rejected me even though I had permission to come in. I tried to rip the steering wheel off my car. It didn't work. Those things are pretty solid today. You have to be willing to suffer. And if you're contemplating forgiveness and reconciliation, you have to accept something that's been written a long time ago, and it's a simple phrase: life is difficult. And the assumption is that the reason we have neurosis or mental illness, the majority of us refuse to accept that life is difficult by nature. And so we take all these steps to try to avoid suffering, and as a result, we avoid the lessons that need to be learned, the strength that needs to be developed to help us get what we're hoping for. So you have to be willing to suffer through this. A part of that is what you owe as a father. When we went to prison, we abandoned our children. And we're not entitled to the name or the title dad. You are their father, but to be a dad is something that is earned, that can be lost and regained. And in your case, brother, and in my case, I can't tell you how long it will take, but you're in it for the long haul. And I'll tell you, I had to stop doing this because I was freaking people out. In August of 2010, I was reunited with my daughter after 22 years. And she found me because through my life, I didn't know where she was at. Through my life, when I changed, I discovered the internet. The internet was new when I got out. It was new. I'm not just saying it's not like it's been out. It was new then. And I was using the internet, and this was when they were holding classes on how to turn a computer on. That's how new computers and the internet was, right? So when I was accomplishing things in my life, I'd get on the internet. I didn't even know how to. I don't even know how I knew to do this. I'd get on the internet and write her a letter and just post it somewhere. I don't even know where I was posting it. Hey, I got out. Hey, I bought a house. I was putting out dinner plates for her, buying her Christmas gifts for a tree, under the tree. And then some of my friends told me, this is weird, you gotta knock that off, it's freaking us out. And after talking with people, I realized that's a little absurd. So I'd buy the gifts, and instead of putting them in a tree, I'd put them in the closet. Instead of putting the plate on the table or put it in the fridge. Because I was told in treatment you have to act as if. And I still live by that. It's called manifestation. If you want the life, you have to see the life that you want, and then you have to go after it, and you have to live like that's the life you have. You have to keep these, my uncle says you have to keep your family on your mind because that's your duty. Right? And so everything you do, you share and honor them in some way, shape, or form. My daughter found me probably 11 years into my search for her, one day when she Googled her own name. And when she Googled her own name, all those articles that I had written her popped up. You said it, you have to be willing to endure. It's something that I believe, my relationship with my sons it is not like I have with my daughters because they were adults by the time I got, were accepted into their lives, but I have that relationship with them. And I have a godson, and I have my 2 children, and my oldest daughter, after 22 years, we just drove down to go see her for New Year's this year. It's what you have to be willing to endure, brother. Okay? And when you feel like the victim, know that you have every right to have hurt, but you don't have, it doesn't benefit you to feel like the victim in this situation. Okay? And you've wounded them, and they're traumatized by that, and trust and attachment to you, it's going to take a long time. Stay the course. Honor them, and in hopes that they come back to you. But there's no guarantees, but it's worth the wait. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. To all of you, to all the ABG staff, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to hang out. For those of you who got books, I'm willing to sign them. I'm going to park so I can sit down. I shouldn't have been standing this long. That's our wrap. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Have a good night. Bless you.